All right, so stoked to be back. AI with Alec episode. I can't even say my own name. It's probably because I'm so excited to be here today with Bret Greenstein, who is the Chief AI Officer of West Monroe. And Bret, before we get into anything here, I just want to say thanks for being here. Super stoked for the conversation.
Well, thank you, Alec. It's a topic I'm so passionate about. I don't know how we'll ever finish this conversation. It's going to go on.
100% with you. And just folks, so you know, this is a double E by trade. So we got a lot of horsepower. So it's going to be a lot less of Alec talking and a whole lot of Bret. So let's kick things off. There's so many directions we could go. I loved our pre-call, but I'm going to give you the magic wand question, right? So let's just say you could wave a magic wand. You can take 100,000 person, publicly traded company, insert category of vertical or whatever, and you can move forward into the future, 2-3 years, and you're going to have them completely AI native, AI transformed, operationalizing it at a clip that we all know that is possible if certain circumstances are met. And Bret, from your vantage point, what would that company look like, and paint the picture of like what is a fully transformed AI native future state for these types of companies that are trying to figure this out? And I know you know the answer, so let it rip.
So I love that you put a time frame on it. I don't think we do know the time frame, but it is inevitable that AI is good at a lot of things that we do and can augment what a lot of us do. If you're a large enterprise company who's really all in on this, and there are several who are in almost every industry who are really working hard on that, you're going to see AI as a significant portion of the activity of every single process area within the business. You're going to start to ask yourself, why did I have only people, paper, and spreadsheets doing something that people with AI could do significantly faster? And so that 100,000 person company might do the work of a 300,000 person company today. It's about scale and speed, and about relying on AI for the things it's good at, and relying on people for the things that they're good at. The combined capability is so much better. And I often think about this. I had somebody ask me today, can I just replace a person with an agent? And it doesn't really work that way. It's actually, people have so many roles and so many activities. Many of those activities are not high value, but they're expensive because we're expensive. So if you can offload a lot of things that people do that are mechanical, the aggregation of data, the summarization of something, and allow people to focus on what they're really good at, which is judgments, experience, critical thinking, accountability, that person is now supercharged and powerful and scalable. And I think it's about making all of us scalable, every business scalable, and not relying on the linear growth path of just adding more people to do the same things they did before.
God, I love that answer. We're going to go a little deeper here, right? So I'm all about humans plus AI, right? And not humans versus AI machines, however you want to describe it. And what you just touched, I love that you answered that question by saying that 100,000 person company is going to produce at the level of a 300,000 person company, right? Because you're going to augment the capabilities. You're going to delegate certain work that machines are much better at to enable and empower people to do the work that they're uniquely, qualified and exceptional at. So can you make it even more tangible and to go from where you are, but just straight to like take a specific workflow, a human, a team, and just like talk through the kind of stuff that you're seeing out there. Says, hey, this is how really great companies that are pretty leading edge are enabling human beings to collaborate with machines in a way that is producing extraordinary value. And it can be as tactical as you want.
Well, the fun part of that is there isn't a process today that isn't better with AI and people than just people alone, because every process was designed around the premise that somebody's going to be finding something, reading something, summarize something, analyzing something, transcribing something, all things that AI is good at, but also reviewed, checked, verified, things that people are very good at. So I'll just give you a simple example. An internal audit process that I worked on had some very expensive people who were very busy trying to do an enormous amount of this internal audit work, which required pulling data from multiple systems, reviewing it against policies, making decisions, and then taking action. And I was asked, could I just automate their entire job? And that didn't make any sense to me because they were trained for 25 years to learn what they learned. They have a domain and a discipline that they're really good at, and they're accountable. But when I asked them what they do, 80% of their day was spent finding data, communicating, summarizing, all this stuff. So we put AI at the front of the process. It's an AI native process. Put it at the front and let it handle as much of that as it can, and then triage and prioritize the output. And then the stuff that hits people has already been put in context, triage, prioritized, recommended actions, and the workload that hit people dropped 50%. So when you look at that, you just think, how many other processes do you look at things that have no value at all because you have to look at 100% of the stuff coming in, or you read everything? Now, I think there's always that concern that maybe it's not right, but that's actually the point. It's just really fast and productive and will follow whatever rules and guidelines and stuff you give it, better instructions, better output. And then people are actually still your decision maker. They always were, they always will be. And so they're the ones accountable to that internal audit process, and they know how to look for good or bad. But you just help them enormously. Like, have you ever had anyone help you with something and you know they take the burden off of you of something you don't want to do so you can focus on what you love? That's where AI seems to have the most impact.
Yeah, for sure. And the taste and the expertise and the nuance and the things that, humans develop over time, and that feel, I think, is something that's really exciting for those folks that have it to then be able to be supercharged, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question on that front is, and I think we share a similar mindset on this, right? We run at AI, we run at technology, we always have, and we love it, and it's exciting, but it's not as exciting for some people, right? So it's a little scary, it's complicated, perhaps, so maybe could you speak to a little bit of the, people and process bit of the people, process, and technology equation, and how folks are starting to overcome some of those hurdles that are inherent, understandably?
Yeah, this is the biggest change in our entire lifetime. Nothing has ever affected any of us career-wise, personal-wise, our children at this scale. And AI is also very hard to understand, but deceptively simple to use and really hard to master. And so you have this thing with this immense power at a scale you can't even comprehend. Data centers that are, use as much energy as a city. And yet anyone can just type a prompt and get an answer. And so they feel like they could use it the way you can use a Google search or something else. But to actually master it, to get really good output, to do incredible things, does require a new sense of how to interact with it. And I think it's a lot like the people skills we learn as leaders and as business people. How do you get the most out of working with people? How do you relate to people? How do you influence people? You now have to influence and relate with and manage a thing that is not a person, that behaves differently, similar, but different enough. And the more you do understand it, the more you can almost reverse engineer how you interact with it to get the best outcomes. And you go from being a person who sends a random prompt to a person who can prompt pretty well to an AI whisperer, somebody who can get it to do nearly anything you need it to do. That growth is a personal growth and a new set of, I'll call them the soft AI skills that are needed, just like we built those soft people skills that made us effective people. So somewhere someone's writing a Dale Carnegie book about how to relate to AI, how to make friends and influence AI. That should be a book. I should write that.
100%. Don't be mean to the AI. Not a good idea.
Yeah, it's analogous to, but not the same as dealing with people. And so we have these new soft skills to learn. And as we do, it does change the way we see work and the way we see working with AI. And by the way, it is terrifying for people at a different level. There is a huge fear that it replaces jobs. I understand the fear, but people who can use it are so productive. And so I have a friend who's in the paralegal profession, and that person does not want to use it at all because they feel they've mastered their job. AI could never be as good. And I think if you're trying to grow your business, you can't not look at AI, because then that one paralegal could do the work of three and grow. But that person doesn't work in a growing business, it's a stable business, and change is not helpful. So the other part of this is you need to have the conditions for change. You need to be in a business that has an urgency to grow, has competitive threats, things like that. Those will cause people to gravitate to AI more because there's an urgency to it. I think if you leave it as really optional and you don't have that level of comfort, it's easy to ignore for a while. But inevitably, every industry is going to be adopting it at its own rate, and you can't ignore it forever.
Without question. And I think that brings me to something that we talked about, which I hope you can kind of unpack a bit on now that we got the camera on, because it was so interesting. But just the way you talked about data And this baseline assumption pre-LLM, so let's call it 3, 4 years ago, what have you, where, oh, the data's got to be super clean and, what have you for us to do anything. And that all becomes almost like a longer term, kind of initiative that runs on rails, and it takes too much time and people get frustrated, right? And I think you have a perspective on this that I think folks would find quite interesting, especially as it relates to how clean does the data have to be in order to enable the orchestration and the introduction of AI agents that are meaningfully impacting the business and doing the things that we're all so excited about when we think about enterprise deployment of AI agents.
Yeah, there's a lot of dimensions to that. The data can be as messy as it is today and still get value from AI. And the reason why is previously AI models were they were precisely built for specific tasks. So they needed to be built on perfect data to perform the task really well. And this is the same is true for RPA and analytics. It was very bespoke and had to be very precise. And with pre-trained models in generative AI, you now have a general intelligence that is broad. And when they added reasoning models, it became more resilient, like it could build a plan, test a plan, and execute against it. And so it can work the way that we work. You can give it very messy data. As a matter of fact, you can misspell every word in a prompt and it still knows what you want. So the cleanliness of the data is not the point. Knowing which data matters is really useful. And so you're seeing a shift from prompt engineering to context engineering, which is providing more data that's relevant. And so you can make AI do something that people do now with the data as you have it, wherever it's sitting, on-prem, under your desk, wherever it is in whatever form it's in, you can bring it in, build a pipeline, and make it do something. But as soon as you start doing things with AI, you're going to realize, well, I want to do more. And then you're going to want to clean up the data. You're going to want to curate it. You're going to want to know exactly which data is most relevant because you don't need all the data. I was with a company and they wanted to move their data to the cloud and then use AI with it. And they wanted to move all 10 years of their data to the cloud. And I asked why, and they said, we don't know if we're going to need it. And when we went through all the things they were going to use it for, it never needed more than 6 months worth of data. But there's this fear of losing it. You don't lose it. You leave it where it is and call it if you need it. But most of the decisions we make are reasonably recent over a couple of whatever periods of time or comparisons. And you can do a lot with the data as it stands. The other part that is now easier is it's very good at ingesting data from wherever it sits. So things like Model Context Protocol, which provides an interface to applications and data, can basically build a bridge into existing data systems. You can pull data with API calls and SQL calls and stuff from generative AI. You can integrate direct into applications. You have the full web behind you. So it's much easier to bring data in than it ever was. And with the right instructions, you can also parse it down to the data that matters.
Perfect. And this could get spicy. So, and we love spicy, and it doesn't need to get spicy by all means as well. But so what you just touched on there, reminds me of something along the lines of the following. So previous to ChatGPT moment in time, right? LLMs and so on and so forth, there was application-centric architectures, right? So we have all this data in these various databases and we're optimizing for, deterministic software. We got to press buttons to get it to do things, et cetera. And very quickly, folks are realizing we're moving rapidly towards more of a data-centric and ultimately a knowledge-centric architecture, which is a fancy way of saying it's not saying the quiet part out loud that the traditional SaaS industry is being disrupted, and some of these applications are going to survive and thrive by becoming "quote unquote" more intelligent, and others might not. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit to any dimension of, and especially for a non-technical audience member, senior business person, of why is it or how is it that maybe the data that used to be siloed in 57 different applications that their people had to use is now more so being understood and made available in a much more intuitive and seamless way for employees, because that has some significant implications, I think. So I'll leave it there. You go any direction you want to
go. The challenge with existing enterprise applications is they are designed around a human workflow with a lot of steps that they drag you through in their screens to reach their systems and their reports. And that has a beautiful, productivity gain, but it's static. And it's very rigid in the sense of the human workflow. And what you're seeing out of AI native software, the same way that SaaS native software disrupted on-prem and stuff that was lifted and shifted into cloud. AI native is putting the person at the center. So instead of going through 15 screens in a CRM to introduce a new client and set up everything, the user says, I want to add a client, here's the name, and it goes off and researches the client, fills in as much data as it can, and only asks you the questions for the pieces you don't need, that it didn't know. And putting a person at the center of the workflow and letting agents do the work is very different than having people handing off through the screens on various existing systems. Now, a lot of enterprise software will just adapt. They will become more person-centric and use more generative AI of an interface. But there's also an arrogance that comes with application and software development that a chat interface is somehow not as elegant as the beautiful UI that was spent, a decade of refining. It's somehow less capable or less compelling. But end users actually just want to get things done in the easiest possible way, and the easier you can make that, the more they'll care, not the UI, but they're going to care much more about the experience, which is, I just need to add a record, and I don't need to go through 50 screens to do it. And don't put all the error checks in and block me and tell me I have to go back. If you've ever tried to enter something in a system and you don't know something, you are stuck until you find someone who knows the answer to that thing. Or you put in just a random thing just to get past the screen. But generative AI systems are different, AI native systems, because it's really about understanding your goal, want to add a client, understanding what you know, gathering the other data you don't know, and then helping you through the process. And people really love this kind of pattern. So I think it's over time, you're just going to see a more AI native approach to enterprise software. Some will adapt, some won't. The other part that's interesting is a lot of people thought they could just put the agents in the software and you'll be fine. But you'll find a lot of agentic workflows are not in any one system. And so most of your users use more than one system. And so you can't put the agents in one place because it doesn't have all the other stuff. So putting the agents a little closer to the cloud, accessing the systems where they matter, doing it really from the user perspective, it's kind of like entropy. I mean, there is a gravity towards AI as the interface, integrating the data, working on behalf of the user, and operating at the sort of the lowest part of the equation, which more at the cloud user level than deeply in the enterprise applications where it's locked in and may not have access to all the data.
Yeah, fantastic answer. And I'm going to go to this example that we spoke about, and these are real conversations that folks are having, right? Is they're sitting at a table and they're thinking through the buy versus build versus partner, strategy in a way that requires, a whole lot more of the three-dimensional chess thinking than perhaps previously. And so to break it down and give you the space to react to it. So how should someone be thinking about whether it's a mental model or a framework or what have you, knowing the things that we know and kind of don't know about where everything's going, back to the magic wand thing. So if a company with 75,000 people has 300 traditional SaaS applications over here, and all those good people are trying to figure out how to navigate, right, and become more AI native in their apps. And then you've got the folks over on the other side of the spectrum, frontier models with forward deployed engineers who are saying, hey, let's just build from custom stuff and human centric, to your point, and we can displace so many of these, and never mind the turning up of the price point once there's lock in. And then you got the GOAT, right? Benioff coming in, agent force, agent, everything. And we got you for all the agent stuff, to your point. How do these people in these chairs, especially non-technical senior business people and otherwise, how do they come together and think through this in a way that is somewhat strategic, knowing what they know and what they don't know? Like, how do you think that through today?
Yeah, this is where all the stress is coming from.
Yeah.
First of all, AI is moving at a rapid pace. So what it's capable of today is going to change tomorrow, the day after, and it's growing at a rate that's exponential as far as its capability, and it's also dropping in cost, 90% a year. So you're looking at something which is an unstoppable force. It's getting smarter, it's doing longer duration work, and it's getting cheaper. And so it's one of those things that whether it's efficient for what you do now, it'll be economically viable 6 months from now or 6 days from now, whenever that happens. And so you have to watch that curve. Then you have to also recognize that if you overbuild right now, anything, it'll get surpassed by this fast moving thing. Yeah. And this has happened over and over again. People build something because they're going to put someone's AI in their thing. It's going to be perfect. And then 5 minutes later, it's been absorbed by the platforms. And at the same time, you can't lock yourself in now because the future is uncertain. It's very clear there'll be a vertical integration of AI and data and various solution patterns and workflows. So you know it's coming. You can see that coming. You overbuild right now, you probably build something that's going to be obsolete. You overcommit and lock yourself into a single enterprise application. It's probably not going to keep up with that pace that AI is moving itself. And so you have to pick no regrets moves. We're at a time right now, kind of like earlier days in electric vehicles, where you knew electric vehicles were better, but there was no charging network. A lot of the problems hadn't been solved. Battery life wasn't all the way there. We're early stage, but it's moving in this direction. So you have to plant the foundational pieces that you're going to do that'll be sustainable. Setting up your proper governance, making your cloud choices, building up your skill sets, building initial foundations, integration layers, MCP connections into your data sources. These are things that are sustainable while your models and your agent frameworks and applications change likely over time. And so you have to balance those things. So we look for no regrets moves you can make while delivering value and function. And then as the world is literally forming around us, then making those safer bets later. It's really hard right now to make some of these decisions, but I wouldn't commit to a 3-year, enterprise application transformation that didn't have a really, really compelling roadmap, because you are running a risk of overbuilding and then missing out on that next thing. But you can't wait for the next thing. So people are doing meaningful ROI use cases, of which there's hundreds in every company, and building out that foundation, that skills, governance, infrastructure, integrations now, and that allows these use cases with very low bar, low cost, high value, and then over time, let's expand.
Yeah, I love the way you unpack that. And the question I'm going to ask you to follow on to that is going back to what I mentioned before about there was consensus, and clearly there is consensus that the SaaS industry is being disrupted and they're figuring it out. There isn't as much consensus, but there is emerging, signs that that same SaaS industry that historically, had enabled a lot of the professional services industry to grow, kind of right alongside of it, is now being disrupted as well. And one of the conversations I think is super interesting is you're seeing, whether it be OpenAI say, hey, if you spend 10 million plus with us, you get a forward deployed engineer and or a team of them, and they help you figure this stuff out and so on and so forth. And that's helpful and useful, but they're not going to provide you with perspective about Anthropic or anything else, understandably so. And so it seems like there's a really wonderful opportunity for the equivalent within the consulting arena to be able to function, maybe with that level of sophistication, both business strategy and technology, et cetera, but in a more agnostic way. But that's a tee up for you. And again, anywhere you want to go, but how do you feel the consulting industry and professional services industry is starting to be disrupted, and or where is this going? Because I think that's a conversation with, I always butcher it, I think it was Accenture, but there was an announcement last week that caught a lot of people's attention about some of their downsizing, pointing to AI, of course, as the driver. So would love to hear some thoughts on this.
Yeah, this is so a couple things. One is the use of forward deployed engineers and other systems engineers and architects from the technical platforms is really necessary. Those technologies change so rapidly. There are so many best practices and techniques, and they're always evolving. And so they reduce the friction for the adoption of technology like OpenAI and others. That being said, they're not transformative. They're individual architects helping you leverage the technology better. The transformation is happening at the business process level. And it happens with industry knowledge, business process knowledge, technical integration work on top of those technologies, working with those forward deployed engineers. And so everyone needs help to get through this because it's really hard. There's no one thing you can just buy that magically makes you AI native. This is we said before, this is the largest change management in our history. It's transformational for every process. It touches every role. It's complicated, difficult, and changing. And so because of that, people do need help. But what I see is the shift from knowing what to do. That was a big sweet spot in consulting. That's already in the models. You can ask any model what to do about any problem, and it has a pretty good answer, really good answer, because every consulting firm's been documenting it for the last 10 years, so it's in the models. Knowing how to do it and getting help doing it is much harder. And so there's always room for people who help people. And consulting is shifting from the PowerPoint of knowing what to do, telling you what to do, into knowing how to do it and helping people do it, and focusing on the outcomes. So it's not enough to say you should lower your prices and increase your number of salespeople. That's interesting. It's much more interesting to transform a process that takes advantage of AI to help scale a business, maybe grow the business without adding more of those salespeople, but helping those salespeople more effective, for example, or optimizing the cost structures, but through design and other optimizations to make your pricing better. There's lots of things you can do, but the how is way more important than the what now. And consulting, when you can combine business skills, technology skills, change management skills together, you can deliver those outcomes. But if you approach this as tech only, that's not going to work. You can't get an outcome from tech only. And if it's pure strategy, AI can do that. So it's a really, there's a sweet spot for companies that have all those strengths.
Yeah, 1,000%. I want to be cognizant of time here. So just a question. I've seen it out in the wild a lot, this MIT study, which, we don't need to dig into the validity of the data itself per se. And I don't even know if it actually is an MIT study, but this notion of 95% of AI initiatives or POCs failing versus the 5%. And I think you've touched on a number of different dimensions of perhaps why these POCs don't necessarily, work out as well as folks would like. But I think the question I would have for you, just from your vantage point is, how much learning do you think the C-suite needs to take on more or less themselves versus, kind of a more traditional model of, we set the strategic direction and we don't actually have to get in there and use these tools and so on and so forth. Because what I've seen in folks in, my world and that I've talked to, both the deeply technical and otherwise, I keep seeing this pattern of some of the companies that are, moving the fastest and having the most impact in this space. You've got CEOs down who are literally, using the tools with their hands in the dirt. And I don't know if that's just a small data set in my orbit, or if there's something there, but I'm curious, what do you think is going to help companies cross the chasm or what have you to get away from, we did some AI stuff and it just failed, and so we throw our hands up? Like, what's the special sauce? Or maybe we've already touched on it and it's a redundant question, but I'm curious if you want to go any deeper on that.
There's a lot of special sauces. So yeah. Probably herbs and spices all mixed together to really make this really work. There's not a single thing. And I think the problem is that a lot of leaders think that AI is a thing you can just buy, turn it on, and you're going to have an outcome. And so leaders who don't understand it, not that they don't have to be data scientists, they have to have used it heavily enough to really understand the unique characteristics of it. Because what you're doing is you're introducing something new into your infrastructure. When electricity was introduced, it changed the structure of every business. It moved the distribution of power, it moved everything. And you have this thing that is shifting the gravity and centers of power and the centers of productivity and centers of knowledge in a business. You can't have leaders who don't understand it. Now, that being said, I don't think they have to be data scientists, but they do have to understand the nature of it, what its strengths, what its weaknesses, where it's going, enough so that when they're making investment decisions and process decisions and change decisions, they have the context of it enough to make sure that they're thinking clearly about this. Most of those POCs are, first of all, the flaw is a POC. We already know that AI can do this work. Proving value is actually sort of a cop-out. What you have to focus on is, do you know where to apply it? Do you know how to apply it? Do you have people who can? Can you drive the change? It's much more phases than POCs. A lot of POCs were done by technical people who proved it could be done with no line of sight to the implementation and adoption. And the people who actually know how work is done are not sitting in an IT center. They're near where the work is. So the best projects, and I've seen hundreds of them, are when the business is involved with technology and the leadership understands what they're trying to accomplish. And you're seeing design for production, design for change. You're changing the business and the way of working. Leadership has to understand that. And those technology and business people have to work together to achieve those outcomes. You want to change the way that suppliers are onboarded. You need your supplier team working with technology, working with all the data to understand what a better way of working would be, and then implementing, going through the change management, measuring, and adopting. Otherwise, it's just a science project. And there's a lot of science projects or people pushing a license for a thing that's going to magically change your life. It's like people selling a pill to make you live longer. It sounds really good, but actually exercise, discipline, consistency, that's what makes you live longer.
So I'm going to ask you the last question. This is a fantastic answer, and I can't wait to distill this into micro essay and get this out there. But the last question, which is, I think it's a pretty ridiculous question, but I just have to ask, how much of this is enabling executive leaders to experience the magic of AI and then, perhaps wrong terminology, but have the humble confidence to then get into an environment and reimagine different dimensions of value chains, workflow, org structure, right? How quickly do you have to get into that kind of thinking? Because it feels like that's a pretty significant part of this ultimately, and maybe that's phase 3, who knows?
Yeah.
But that's a tough one. Is like you got to maybe reorient the way you look at the way your business creates value.
It is. I think but I don't think you do it all at once. And no one has to know the end game because we don't know no one knows the end game. You have to look at this and say, first of all, do you understand the potential and the strengths and weaknesses of AI now and where it'll be 2 years from now because you're making long-term plans. If you have a sense for that, and then you look at the nature of your business and say, well, look, this is not going to be differentiating in 2 years because of AI, or this could be faster because of AI, or the marginal cost of this thing could be nearly zero because of AI, so I could shift the way that I focus my business. When you see it through that lens, strengths and weaknesses, its capabilities and where it's trending, you look at your business differently because you start planning for growth, competitiveness, differentiation, cost, scale, in light of AI and people in that world. And so if you were, going back to the electricity metaphor, if you were building things with steam engines and whatever people use for electricity, and you didn't see electricity for its strengths and weaknesses, you wouldn't know that you could distribute the machines across the manufacturing line instead of bringing the stuff to the machine. And you would never envision the kinds of economies of scale and efficiencies that could come from that. If you can't imagine it, you can't make it. And so helping people to imagine it means they have to see some of this with more clarity. There's also the danger that people buy into the hype, which is a horrendous mistake. That's a huge pitfall. Or live in absolute denial. You got to live in the reality bubble of AI, which is it's good at this now, it'll get better at this, it's never going to do this well, or it doesn't do it for a long time, like judgment and accountability. So I need to have a balanced system. People who have those roles, AI that does these things, know the scaling limits and the scaling capabilities of these things so I can start to plan for them and build them into my financial models. I might need 500 more people to grow my business from A to B, but I might need 250 people and more AI, and I can scale even further to C. Like you have to think in those terms. Leaders need to get to that point.
Tremendous answer. You crushed it. So, Bret, I really appreciate your time. And I know everybody in the AI with Alec community is as well. So thanks again. And I hope we get to have you back here sometime soon.
Thank you, Alec.
Take care.
Take care.